Huge week in the markets this week, and I'm here to cover it for you. Be sure to check out the chapters below because I respect your time. If you want, skip ahead to the chapter that's relevant for you. But we're going to be going over all of the red folder news this week that you need to be aware of, as well as some opportunities that we could potentially leverage. And then I'm going to go over 5 stocks: Nvidia, AMD, SMCI, Tesla, and Microstrategy. Not necessarily in that order. Again, check out the chapters below. Let's get right into it, guys. So we have the FOMC Fed funds rate. This is where the Fed is going to decide whether they cut or keep rates where they are at. So what I think is going to happen here, if we take a look at the FOMC watch tool, which is rarely wrong, but the market is expecting that the Fed cut by 25 basis points. Now, why is that? Because if we look at last week's data, you could see here that data has been coming in hot. So unemployment claims came in higher than expected. The week before that, unemployment rate came in higher than expected, 4.2 versus 4.1. Also, remember this, if you're a fan of this channel, you know that we've been tracking this 10-year, 3-month yield curve here. This is the yield curve that I've been watching to basically see if the market is getting hot from a rates perspective and if things are starting to get recession-y, right? Because this is what happens before every single recession. However, as I noted before, it could take some time before the uninversion of this yield curve, which actually happened on Friday. You can see a pop above there. And a recession. So the last time that this happened, it actually took almost 6 months, 5 to 6 months before we hit a recession. The time before was a couple of months. The time in 1989 was almost a year before a recession happened. So it doesn't mean that a recession is going to happen tomorrow, but for sure, your ears should be perked. Your eyes also should be perked watching for this. This is definitely now, it is definitely time to be monitoring how high rates are going to go. So because of this, as well as the fact, like I said, that unemployment has been coming in hotter than expected, I do expect the Fed to cut. Now, there is a little bit of a snag because PPI, which is one of the metrics that the Fed looks at to track inflation, PPI actually did also come in hotter than expected. So I think that this will likely be the last cut, and then they will hold here for a few months to see how the data behaves. Does unemployment continue to go up, in which case the Fed will have no choice but to continue cutting? Is it inflation? Are these inflation metrics going to come in even hotter, in which case the Fed cannot cut? And hence, this is why we always trip ourselves into a recession around the happenings of these metrics here. I will be going live for FOMC as usual. I will be day trading futures after FOMC as usual. So make sure that you stick around the channel and watch for the notifications for that live. All right, let's start off with Microstrategy. Microstrategy here, as I told you guys, Microstrategy is in a key position to sell puts. It is free money. What do I mean by this? Let me show you. I told you I was selling these exact puts here in this video here. Go and watch it if you want. I break down Microstrategy in full detail in one video, but I sold the 200 puts. These are up basically 90%. I can, let them expire for 100% if I wanted to, or I can close this come next week. But I sold these for $510 a piece. They are now worth a measly $53. So free money because this was the 200 put. If we look at MicroStrategy, it's currently trading at 408, and I sold the 200 puts, which means that MicroStrategy would have to fall by more than 50% for me to even be assigned on those puts. And at this stage, I will gladly take those if I was assigned. I was okay with that outcome. So MicroStrategy has been added to the NASDAQ 100, which means that a lot of portfolio managers will now have to rebalance because they are in the QQQ ETF, the second most liquid ETF on the market, SPY being the first. Also, if you look at MicroStrategy Watch, since the time that I made that video, they have acquired another 15,400 Bitcoin. I really like this site, MSTR-tracker.com, but it shows you how much Bitcoin they have, when they're acquiring Bitcoin, etc. A lot of all these nifty details. Check it out if you want, not affiliated. But they added another 15,000 Bitcoin. So now their total balance of Bitcoin is 402,100 Bitcoins, which currently, as of the time of this recording, has a market value of 38.6 billion. So as I told you, I will continue to sell puts on MicroStrategy as long as they have the ability to continue selling these convertible bonds. How do I know when they will lack that ability? Well, in my view, what I expect is when Bitcoin goes through its next bear market, and it will, because Bitcoin always suffers bear markets. I don't think Bitcoin is infallible. As a matter of fact, you can check out the super cycle yourself. But the last 3 times that Bitcoin was in a bear market, it took almost 1,000 days before it hit a bear market again. So if we take a look here, 2015 to 2017, that was 1,065 days till the peak. Then we hit another bear market. And if we measure it from this bear market to the next peak, you can see here that it took 1,035 days before it hit another bear market. Now we hit a bear market back in 2021, and we are now at 731 days. It doesn't mean history should repeat itself, but Bitcoin super cycles are pretty much predictable, which is how we continue to buy Bitcoin every time it hits a bear market. I don't even think about it. I load up on Bitcoin. So based on how crypto moves, right, you first have the big Bitcoin move, and then the altcoins move while Bitcoin does, inch up slowly as well. I do think at some point in 2025, we will have another Bitcoin bear market, either 2025 or 2026. It could happen. It usually coincides, surprisingly enough, and ironically enough, it coincides with a actual recession. Bitcoin does then hit a bear market when the stock market hits a bear market. So the bottom of this bear market was the pandemic, right? 2020. The bottom of this bear market was 2022, same as stocks. This right here, the 2015 stock market correction, the Asia scare, this coincided with a Bitcoin bear market, right? We had a correction in 2011 in the stock market, same as Bitcoin. So it is not detached from the stock market. And the next time that the stock market is in a major correction or bear market, likely due next to a potential recession, if you take a look at the rates that I just showed you before this segment, when that happens, I think that it will be harder for Microstrategy to sell convertible bonds, because you hear the chatter on Wall Street, right? When Bitcoin hits a bear market, you start hearing the doubt. Oh, Bitcoin is just the same as tulips. It has no value. This is a money loser. You should stick your money in gold, et cetera, et cetera. So that is what I imagine will happen with MicroStrategy. As I said in my last video, that when Bitcoin hits a bear market, it will be harder to issue those convertible bonds. But until that happens, I will continue to sell puts on MicroStrategy on pullbacks. We had this pullback here. I sold the 200 puts. I expect MicroStrategy to rally now that it's in QQQ, rally a bit more, maybe hit that 500 mark again. When we pull back some more, I will sell another round of ridiculously expensive puts for a ridiculously cheap strike price. And if you want access to all of my swings, all of my option selling, and you want to watch me trade live every single morning, make sure that you sign up. Link is in the description. Come and join us. I trade live every single morning. Trust me, it's a lot better money spent than watching, garbage TV on your streaming networks. Come and watch me trade live. We also do a group investing call once a month where I teach you some of the investing strategies and technical analysis and valuation models that I look at in order to buy stocks like Amazon, Google, etc. Tesla, some of these stocks that we picked up for very cheap and are sitting very pretty right now. All right, let's now jump to AMD. AMD has really had a pretty bad second half of the year. Since March, it has been in a free fall from 227, now trading $100 less at 127. Broke this trend line here, but we all know that the first break of the trend line does not necessarily spell trouble, because that can easily be a liquidation candle, taking out all of this liquidation at the bottom of the trend before then popping back above. So the first pop below a trend line, I usually don't believe in when I'm swing trading or when I'm buying something for the long term, right? And we are now hitting a volume shelf. If we look at the volume profile going back 2 years to October 2022, you can see that we are starting to hit a pretty big volume shelf. So, between 100 and 120, I'm really bullish on AMD. Now, from a valuation perspective, that's the technicals. From a valuation perspective, let's take a look at it. If we look at AMD's revenues really since 2016 have been growing pretty nicely, from 4.3, 5.2, 6.4, 6.7, 9.7, 16, 23, those are in billions, obviously, right? And if we take its previous performance and we map that out in the future, we get a discounted cash flow model. It's basically the expected revenues based on previous performance, what we expect to be its operating margins, obviously hoping that their operating margins continue to grow and the revenues continue to grow. You take the operating income, right? It's just 21% of this. You get the operating income minus taxes, and there you go. You have your free cash flow to firm. You take those cash flows, you discount them, you divide them by the shares outstanding, you get a DCF value. So you can look up the discounted cash flow model. There are many different models within that. So do your homework if you want. But you can see here that you end up with a stock price of 177. Now, this obviously doesn't take into account momentum, whatever, because you can have overpriced companies beyond their valuations, right? If you think of something like a Palantir or a Tesla, on paper, they are overvalued, right? Now, based on momentum, based on expectations and moat and things that aren't really calculable on a spreadsheet, you can make the case that those things should be priced at those levels, right? So when we look at just the paper valuation of AMD, we get a stock price of around 177. So I'm happy. If you're bullish on AMD, which I am, I'm very happy buying AMD in that $100 to $120 range. I actually started nibbling on it a little bit once we hit this trend line, and I will likely add more here. But if we hit this level, I'm looking to buy leaps and more shares, especially because I told you about the discounted cash flow valuation. But if you look at its actual roadmap, we are expecting AMD to make some pretty heavy advancements into AI accelerators. So it's MI325X Instinct accelerators coming to the market imminently, followed by MI350X. Again, this is just a high-level overview, not a dedicated AMD video, but go and look that stuff up. I implore you to go and look that stuff up. The point is they have a very robust roadmap as it relates to AI, and we're not even anywhere near what they are planning on delivering for 2025. And if we take a look at Broadcom earnings obviously it's not the same company, but if we just take a look at the picture, Broadcom recently hit all-time highs because it had a record earnings call based on AI growth. We are nowhere near bubble territory, in my opinion, because these companies like AMD, Nvidia, Broadcom, they continue to deliver and grow into their valuations. Now, I will admit AMD, the second part of this year, has had a lackluster delivery schedule, but we expect that to change in 2025. And we cannot discount the fact that on paper, they've actually been doing it year after year. So they did hit a slump this year, admittedly, but this just allows us to capture this at a discount, in my opinion. Again, that 100 to 120 is where I'm starting to look to increase my position in AMD. In terms of Tesla, as I told you, I expect Tesla to hit all-time highs. We did hit an all-time high of 436. Really not much to say here besides I would buy Tesla on pullbacks. At this level here, there's nothing else that you could do if you missed the boat, right? You are not going to buy it at 436 and replicate the gains that we did when I sent out an alert at 150, I sent out an alert at 220. And you can see here on the Discord, our last buys were at 152 and 220. Like I said, you can spend your money on streaming services if you want, or you can come and watch me trade live every day, and you get access to all of these alerts. All of this stuff is unlocked for your viewing pleasure. Really not much to say here on Tesla. I did the dedicated video a few days ago. Watch that here. I talked about the Tesla Model Q. I talked about Donald Trump potentially lifting restrictions to allow for nationwide FSD driving if it goes well in a couple of pilot states, California included. So go watch that video if you want a full breakdown of Tesla. But in terms of here, there's not much you could do except for buy it on pullbacks, in my opinion. I think $2 trillion is the midterm valuation, which would put us at around 638. Again, that's not something that's going to happen by the time Christmas rolls around, but that is my terminal valuation based on what we know now. Nvidia, same thing as AMD, right? It is now at its trend line. This right here is actually a almost 2-year trend line. It did pop below it. You do see this ugly head and shoulders here, but we did also have a few head and shoulders in the past that didn't pan out. and completely bleed us. Right now, I'm just holding my Nvidia shares that we bought in the mid 90s. You could see my alert here on August 5th. I bought Nvidia, Soxel, Amazon, QQQ, and SPY. And you can see here if we drag the volume profile to that August 5th level, that most of Nvidia's volume recently in the second half of this year has actually been right around this level, right? We hit the bottom of this huge volume shelf here, and we don't really have much volume until we start getting below these levels. But one thing to also note is that this was a heavy resistance area. You could see this block of orders here followed by another time that we resisted before we broke above, and we are now testing that as support. We jumped from it one time in October, and if we hit that level, then I will likely buy another round of leaps on Nvidia that expire in 2026. I'm also contemplating selling the 115 puts, which have a 9 delta for $112 per contract that expire January 17th. And if we get to this level, like I said, I will likely buy the leaps that I was eyeing for 2026. So if we look at the January 2026 expiration, the leaps that I would buy, I like to buy leaps in the money. So if we get to that level, I will likely buy the $100 calls that expire January of 2026 if we get to that level right there. Then finally, SMCI. Now, SMCI, I am looking to get into on a short-term basis because they have until February to submit the regulatory documents to avoid NASDAQ delisting. Now, they were kicked out of the NASDAQ index, which is different than the NASDAQ exchange. There's an exchange called NASDAQ, which is one of the two major exchanges, New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. And then there's also the NASDAQ index, which is the QQQ ETF is based on, right? So that when we talk about trading the NASDAQ, we're talking about the index. When we're talking about delisting from the NASDAQ, we're talking about the exchange, right? So they were already kicked out of the index, not yet kicked out of the exchange, and they have until February. And I think that we will likely see another rally on SMCI before February. We do have to be very careful with SMCI because they're saying that there are reports that say that they're exploring a capital raise, which means that if they issue more shares, then SMCI stock price will tank because of interim dilution. They also enlisted BDO as its independent auditor. BDO is a major international tax firm. I think it's based in Belgium, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's headquartered in Belgium, but they're basically in every single state in the US as well. So there's BDO USA. But they enlisted them as their independent auditor. So being as volatile as SMCI is, I do think that there is another rally to be had between now and February. It will drop. The stock will drop come Monday morning because of that capital raise announcement, but it could be a very short-term drop that could be bought up. So I'm going to be monitoring whether SMCI, if and when it does drop, if it ends up wicking back up because the market is buying up SMCI due to that overreaction, right? Then I will likely take short-term calls, but I'm not really looking to hold SMCI past February. It could pan out. It's just not the type of thing that I want to throw a ton of money at. I'd rather have my money in cheap blue chip stocks like AMD, Nvidia, Tesla on pullbacks. But you can see here, even if you go to its peak, most of the shares were bought in this range between 39 and 48, right? And even if you go to more recent times, you could see that most of these shares for SMCI were bought in this range. So this one I'm going to wait for on Monday to see how the market reacts to its capital raise. And if it ends up just being a bleeding candle that ends up closing extremely red, then I will probably lay off it until I start to see signs that the liquidity is being bought up. Anyway, traders, that is it for this video. Let me know if you like these style of videos, and I will try to make updates every single week. So let me know in the comment section if you like them. Make sure that you sign up below to join us. I trade live every single morning at market open. I day trade futures as well as throughout the day and the week. I send out my swings, my analysis, my option sells, etc. So you definitely want to be a part of it. Subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. Stay safe out there, traders. Peace.